Okay, good morning, class. We're going to pick it up this week with the second half of chapter 17. Now, in full disclosure, this is my second time recording this lecture. I did the recording a couple days ago, and I could not get the video to upload. It was very frustrating. So I just decided to try it again. So I might go, actually, I'll probably do better because I have some experience giving this exact lecture. So what we're going to do is pick it up with part two. And our end goal with this week's lecture and discussion is to write our first resistance training program. Okay. So today we're going to really kind of cover what are some of the key things we need to know as we are selecting different variables. Okay. The first topic to address is exercise order. Now, when you're writing your program, I've given you a template. So the exercise order is not something that you're going to have to think about and set yourself because I've already set it for you. But I want to give you some idea of why things are set the way they are on the template. So typically there are four considerations that we would take when we're setting an exercise order, okay? Sort of the go-to method that the NSCA uses, we see listed on this slide here. Typically, it is recommended that you follow the sequence of power exercises first, followed by your core exercises, which are the big multi-joint lifts, as I say here, the squat, the deadlift, the bench press, etc. These are exercises where you're going to be moving a lot of weight using multiple joints, your large muscle groups, okay? And then third and last, you would do your assistance exercises, which we could define as single joint exercises like bicep curls, exercises that involve smaller amounts of muscle mass. The reason for this sequence is you want to do the things that are the most difficult first. Power exercises are going to be the most neurologically taxing, so you want to do those when you are the most fresh. So they require the most difficult technique. The more tired you are, the more likely your technique may break down and you're going to be more likely to get injured. So again, you want to do power exercises when you are the least fatigued. So at the beginning of your workout, that will make it a safer endeavor. From there, we then progress to the exercises that are going to produce the most fatigue inside of us. So priority number two after the power exercises are your big multi-joint lifts. Again, these are going to require you to be fresh, relatively speaking, but they're also going to produce a lot of fatigue, which is why we would then progress to the assistance exercises, which are going to be less physiologically and neurologically taxing because you're already going to be tired when you get there. These exercises are also typically seen to be a little bit less important than the exercises in the second category. You know, these are the exercises that are going to make you stronger, bigger, faster, etc. So really the priority is going to be here with the second grouping in our ranking system here. Second consideration is another way we could set exercises up, and I've actually done this on the template. You're going to alternate between lower and upper body exercises. You're not going to do 3 lower body exercises in a row. Okay, because you're going to accumulate a lot of fatigue in your lower body if you do that. So a more efficient way to set up a training program is to do a lower body exercise and then you do an upper body. While you're doing the upper body exercise, your lower body muscles can recover a little bit. So by the time you go back to that second set of lower body, you've recovered somewhat, okay? You might hear this type of training referred to as circuit training or circuits. In our template, I call it a block. So within a given block of exercises, typically there are 3 exercises in the block. You're going to have a lower body, an upper body, and then an assistance. And we're going to sort of just go through that circuit multiple times, and then we're going to progress to our second block, or our second circuit, and do the same exact thing. This is a much more efficient way to train. You can accomplish more work in less time, which is always a good idea, especially if you're working with athletes or teams, etc. So the value in this is, as I just said, more work can be accomplished in less time. A similar thing to that is alternating upper body or lower body pushing and pulling. So think about the example I give in the bullet point is rather than doing, multiple pushing exercises such as a bench press and a shoulder press back to back, you're still going to be using the same muscles largely. You could alternate after you do a bench press, you then do a pulling or a rowing exercise. So then you're sort of working the opposite muscle group. The same logic would apply to what we talked about on this slide here. You're allowing one muscle group to recover while working a different non-competing muscle group. That again is an efficient way to exercise. You can get more work accomplished in less time. And then our fourth consideration sort of groups all of these things together. The block idea that I talked about is another way we could refer to that is what is known as a superset, where you have two or more exercises performed in a row that stress different muscle groups. Okay, you kind of combine those into a circuit. You do the circuit once, you do the circuit twice, 3 times, etc. So you're still getting multiple sets per exercise. You're just not doing those sets consecutively. You're layering exercises and doing them in a circuit fashion. It's a pretty popular way to train in all forms, with the exception of bodybuilding, which typically they may do straight sets from time to time, but they do it for a specific reason. Okay, so the next thing we want to talk about is the load. So the load is going to refer to the work we're doing or the weight that we're lifting. How much weight are we moving with a given exercise? The overall training load could be expressed as the volume load, which is not only going to take into account the weight, but how many times you move the weight, right? So if I'm lifting 100 pounds and I'm doing 5 repetitions, my overall volume load is 500 pounds because I lifted 100 pounds 5 times, okay? That's not super important to consider for what we're doing this week, but when we get to periodization in a couple weeks, we might talk more about the idea of a volume load, okay? Now, before we talk about the load any further, let's establish one thing. Usually the load is going to have an inverse relationship with the number of repetitions that you move that load. So the higher the load, right, the heavier it is, the less reps you can do. That makes logical sense. On the other hand, the lower the load, the higher the reps, okay? We call that the inverse relationship, okay? And that's going to really guide our programming, because if we know an athlete is lifting a very heavy load, then instinctively we know the rep number is going to have to be lower. And I have some charts that will lay all this out for you that you'll use for your program design assignment this week. Now, typically the load is expressed as a percent of the 1 rep maximum or as a percent of 1 RM. In order to use that method of description, you're going to have to do the 1 RM test. So let's say that you do the 1 rep max bench press test and you determine that somebody's 1 rep max is 200 pounds. Okay. If you then use the training load of 75% of 1 rep max, well, 75% of 200 is 150. So that's the amount of weight that person would be lifting using the 75% of 1 rep max training load. Referring to load as a percent of 1 rep max is pretty common in the strength and conditioning world. And it's going to be more important, again, when we get to periodization down the road. For this week's purposes, it's not super important because we will often just describe load as the pounds lifted, not necessarily as a percent of the 1 rep max. So we will come back and revisit that specific thing in a little bit. Here on the next slide, it goes through, some terms that we've already talked about, and it talks a little bit more about 1 rep max testing, which we talked a little bit about in previous chapters, so we're not going to talk about that now. But this is a fairly valuable chart, actually, that shows you an estimate of how many repetitions are performed at a specific training load. So let's go back to what we said we were going to do, 75% of 1 rep max. If we know the load, we can then prescribe the rep number using this chart. So at 75% of the 1 rep max, we could expect our athlete to do somewhere around 10 reps. It's probably not going to be exactly 10 reps. Could be 9, could be 11, but we could write on our program 10. That's our goal. And then we would actually record how many they do later on, on the rest of the program page where we're recording exactly what we've done. The program we're going to write is a roadmap. You still have to then track where you go, what you're doing daily in the lab. How much did you have a goal of sets and repetitions? But you may not hit that goal every week. You may exceed that goal, right? You just need to track that stuff. And I'll show you where to do that on the program here in just a little bit. Now, picking a load can seem difficult, okay? But if you know the goal of the person, you can then set the training load according to the goal, okay? So this chart that we're going to see here, this actually gives you a flow chart again for determining the 1 rep max. I'm sorry, I did not mean to jump to this slide next, so let's go ahead and just skip past this one for now. And this kind of gives you a general guide. If the goal is strength or power, you're going to use heavy loads. If your goal is hypertrophy or muscle growth, you're going to use moderate loads. And if your goal is muscular endurance, you're going to use lighter loads, okay? And again, revisiting that inverse relationship, lighter loads will allow more reps. More reps are going to build endurance. Moderate loads will allow moderate reps. Heavy loads will produce lower reps. But that is exactly what you want for the given training goals that you see listed on this slide. Now, this is a fairly valuable chart that you can use for your case study assignment this week. The word that is in the largest, boldest print shows you the rep range that you're going to look for that goal, right? What this is indicating is strength can be improved anywhere from a 2 to 20 rep range, but it will be improved the biggest and the best in a rep range of 3 to 5, okay? Power, same idea. Power is actually going to be more like 2 to 4, okay? Power will improve across the entire continuum, but it's going to be improved the most here. Hypertrophy, same thing. Muscles will grow no matter how many reps you do. They're going to grow the most if you're in a range from 7 to 11, okay? That's why it's written the biggest here. This is the range that we're going to be using for Jasmine when we write her program. Then lastly, endurance will improve regardless of the rep range, but it's going to improve the most in basically like a 15 plus rep range, okay? That's a good sort of overall guide to look at. And I like to use this chart because it shows you that, yeah, things are going to improve regardless of what you do, but how can you improve them the most? How can you be the most efficient at working towards your goals? This chart really shows you how to figure that out. And now here we have the specifics of transitioning from the load to the repetitions, right? I gave you sort of a range here. This chart shows you essentially the same thing that shows you for strength. It tells you here that your load needs to be greater than 85% and your rep number should be less than 6. Because the load is so heavy, the rep number is going to have to be low. Inverse relationship. Power, we see a similar thing. High intensity, 80 to 90. Rep number is low, 1 to 2. That's for a single effort. Here, multiple effort. Hypertrophy, the load is going to be reduced versus what we saw with strength and power. So it's going to be 67 to 85% of our 1 rep max. And our goal repetition is going to expand out to 6 to 12. Again, moderate load, moderate rep range. High load, low rep range. And then lastly for endurance, low load, less than 67%, high rep range, greater than 12. Okay, now Jasmine, as I'm going to show you all, we identify that she is in a hypertrophy phase in her training. Therefore, her training load is going to look like this, 67 to 85%. Her goal repetitions for almost every exercise that she does is going to be in the 6 to 12 rep range. Okay. We'll move past this slide and we'll revisit this when we get to periodization later. Let's talk about the progression. Again, this is not something we're going to have to deal with right now because we're not actually going to be training Jasmine. But we're going to write a 6-week program. The load that she uses on week 1, she will not use the entire 6 weeks. We should progress the load, make the load heavier as she gets stronger to make sure that we're hitting our rep range. Okay, so there are some guidelines that we use. One is the 2 for 2 rule. So I'm just going to read this to you. If the athlete can perform 2 or more repetitions over the assigned goal. So let's say our assigned goal is 8 and they've gotten 10 in the last set of 2 consecutive workouts for the bench press, okay? Then we know we should increase the weight, okay? So she has to get 2 reps or more above the assigned goal in the last set in 2 consecutive workouts for a given exercise, okay? Then we can add weight. Well, how much weight do we add? That will be answered on the next slide, which shows you here. These are some estimates, right? For upper body, you're always going to add a little bit less than lower body because the lower body muscle mass is larger. People's lower body is stronger than the upper body, so the lower body can handle larger increases in load than the upper body can, okay? We're then going to also consider the fitness level of the athlete. For less trained individuals, we're looking at smaller increases in load. For more well-trained individuals, they can handle slightly larger increases in load, okay? Now, you're not going to have to do this week, but we may do that when we get to periodization. You'll have to actually progress people's loads as we go through the different weeks of the program. All right, our next topic then is to think about overall volume. How many sets are we going to perform, okay? We're going to, again, consider the training goal of the person, but we also need to consider the training status of the person. Beginners will do less sets. Advanced people will do more sets, okay? Now, you'll notice on the set range, on the set number recommended, there is always a range, right? 2 to 6, 3 to 5, 3 to 5, 3 to 6. So let's take Jasmine. She's in a hypertrophy phase. The recommended set number is 3 to 6, okay? Well, we know, based upon the information we have, Jasmine is a beginner, right? Therefore, we're going to go with the low end of the set range, 3 or 4 sets, okay? If we had an advanced trainee, somebody who's been doing resistance training for several years, we might then go with the high end of the range, 5 or 6 sets, okay? So the goal gives us the range. The characteristics of the individual allow us to narrow that range a little bit further, okay? I hope that makes sense, and I explained that clearly. Pretty sure I did. Just go back and rewind this a minute and listen to that again if you didn't catch that, okay? I'll go ahead and say it again anyways. The goal gives us the broad range. The training status of the individual allows us to narrow that range within a 1 or 2 set number. I feel like I stated it better the first time versus the second time, so go back and listen to the first time. Moving on, rest periods, okay? Now, where we said intensity and volume have an inverse relationship, intensity and rest period have a direct relationship, which means the higher the intensity or the higher the load, the higher or longer the rest period needs to be. The lower the load, the shorter the rest period. So direct relationship. So strength typically gets a 2 to 5 minute rest period. Power, same, 2 to 5. For hypertrophy, the rest period is going to, remember, our load goes down for hypertrophy, so the rest period duration can also go down. Load continues to go down for endurance, so our rest period duration can continue to go down for muscular endurance training. For Jasmine, I do have on the template, she's going to do 1 power exercise, so use that guide for the power exercise. The rest of her program is based on the goal of hypertrophy, so we're going to use the rest period length that we see here for Jasmine. restates what I just said, so take a minute to read that if you didn't catch everything. And now we're to our tasks. So what I've done is I've recorded a separate PowerPoint to go over the tasks because I'm trying to do shorter presentations and videos. So jump over to the second PowerPoint voiceover in the folder, which is titled Resistance Training Assignment Directions, and watch that because I'll go through essentially starting on this slide through the templates to give you directions on how to do that. Okay, talk to you all soon.